In this ultimate guide, I'll show you how to write a Mixolydian mode song. I'll start by discussing chord progressions, then melodies, and finally riffs. You don't have to write a song in this order, but it provides a logical framework for teaching and is easy to follow. Throughout the video, I'll create an entire Mixolydian mode song. This will allow you to see how the parts of the song work together as a whole. After watching this entire video, you'll have everything you need to write a complete Mixolydian mode song. Let's begin with chord progressions. The Mixolydian mode is one that is used widely in lots of different styles of music, everything from pop to jazz and blues. Its distinctive major sound makes it very popular. It could be described as mellow or relaxed. Listen to how it sounds here with the G Mixolydian scale. The most important note in Mixolydian is the flat or minor seventh. This is the only note that separates the scale from major/Ionian. It provides the smooth, open sound that Mixolydian is known for. Here are the chords that are found in the G Mixolydian key, with the scale notes that go into each chord: G major, A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, and F major. These are the diatonic chords in the G Mixolydian key. That is, chords that are made purely with the notes from the G Mixolydian scale. G Mixolydian is a good key for guitar players because it has lots of chords that can be played as simple open chords. You can see that each of the diatonic chords has a Roman numeral above it. Lowercase indicates minor chords and uppercase major chords. This helps you to understand chord progressions, as the Roman numerals can apply to any Mixolydian key and simply indicate the function of the chords. Let's start building some Mixolydian mode chord progressions now and look at how you can write your own. Arguably the most common Mixolydian chord progression is 1-7-4-1. It uses all of the basic major triads in the Mixolydian key. This is the best known Mixolydian progression. It is used extensively in classic rock songs, and it is easy to see why. The first reason is it uses all major chords, which means on guitar it can easily be played by using open or bar chords. Therefore, many guitarists will come across this progression by simply practicing playing major chords. From a theoretical level, the progression also works well. Starting on the one major chord clearly defines that you are in a major mode. Moving to the 7 chord then strongly plays the flat 7 note as the root of this chord. So within the first 2 chords we have defined our progression as clearly Mixolydian. The descent from 7 to 4 and then to 1 contains root notes that are a perfect fourth interval apart from one another. This provides a nice symmetrical resolution to the progression. You may also see these 3 chords in a different order within a progression, so feel free to experiment. Another popular Mixolydian chord progression is similar in structure as the first progression you saw, but this time I introduced the minor 5 chord. Let's see how using a minor chord changes the feel of the progression this time. Again, this is clearly a Mixolydian progression. As before, the 1 chord anchors us in a major mode. Moving to the 5 chord introduces the flat 7 note again. The basic triads that have the flat 7 note in are 3, 5 and 7. This separates us from major/Ionian. Let's look at 2 more common chord progressions now. They use the minor 2 chord. You'll see that it is replacing the 4 chord from the first 2 progressions. Like 4, 2 is also in the major/Ionian mode, so you need to pair it with the 1 chord and either 5, 7 or 3 to complete the Mixolydian sound. Pay attention to how swapping the major 4 chord with the minor 2 chord changes the feel of these progressions. The last remaining minor triad is 6. This chord is the same in major and Mixolydian keys, so you will need to use a chord with the flat 7 note in it to show that you are using Mixolydian. The 6 chord is also the relative minor of the 1 chord. That means it shares 2 notes with the 1 chord, and as such can be a useful substitution for the 1 chord in your progressions. It also means that they sound nice played one after the other. Here's an example that brings this all together. The final diatonic chord available in Mixolydian is the diminished 3 chord. Diminished chords have a tense, dark feeling that many songwriters seek to avoid, but this doesn't mean that you have to forget it. In order to create a more usable chord, some songwriters will drop the root note of the 3 diminished chord by half a step and construct a major chord from this new root. This is labelled as a flat 3 chord. For example, in the key of G Mixolydian, you take B diminished, drop its root note to B flat, and then use that to make a B flat major triad. In this next example, I'll use both of these chords in a progression. Listen for the difference in sound they bring, despite both having the flat 7 note within them. Another term that applies here is modal mixture or modal interchange. This is when you take a chord from a parallel key and use it in your progression. You can usually feel and hear when this has happened, as there is a sense that something has changed. This is only a brief change, too short to call it a modulation or key change. We then go back to diatonic chords from the key. A parallel key is any which has the same root or tonic note. For example, we're using G Mixolydian, so parallel keys would include G major, G Dorian, G Phrygian, etc. So the flat 3 chord can also be considered as a borrowed chord from the parallel minor, Dorian and Phrygian keys. They don't have to be modes of the major scale, you can also reach out to more exotic keys like harmonic minor or Phrygian dominant. Any chord that you like from the parallel key can be used, although you'll see some used more commonly than others. This is a hugely powerful technique for your chord progressions and songs. The potential options for borrowed chords is huge, providing you with almost infinite ways to colour and alter your progressions. My recommendation when dipping your toe into these waters is to build up a Mixolydian scaffold in your song first to establish the tonal centre. This would focus primarily on chords 1, 5 and 7, then bring in your borrowed chord for a short time before moving back to diatonic chords. Another popular chord in Mixolydian progressions is the flat 6, borrowed from Phrygian, minor and Locrian. This opens up yet another major chord to use in your progressions. This is a common approach to Mixolydian, creating entirely major song sections. On guitar, this allows you to play all bar chords, which lends itself well to rock. Listen to this in the next example. First up, I'll play the flat 6 to appreciate the sound of this chord. Then I'll play flat 6 and flat 3 after each other. Listen to how bright and positive these all major sections sound. So far I've only used basic triads in our Mixolydian progressions, but you are of course free to use different chord types in your Mixolydian songs. You can experiment with this on any of the chords, but where it is particularly interesting is in introducing or emphasising the flat 7 note. As you understand now, this will reinforce the Mixolydian sound. There are many ways to do this, so what I discuss here won't be exhaustive. If you add a flat 7 note to the 1 chord, it becomes a dominant 7th chord. Here's the first progression I showed you with a 1 dominant 7th chord in it this time. Playing the 1 chord as a dominant 7th chord is common in blues music. The 4 chord can be played as a sus4 chord. This removes the 6th note of the mode from the chord and replaces it with the flat 7th. Let's add this to our progression with the dominant 7th. Another way you can emphasise a note is by using chord inversions. We know that the 5 chord has the flat 7 note in it. If we play the first inversion of the 5 chord, it puts that flat 7 note as the lowest or bass note of the chord. This makes it stand out more than the standard chord. Let's swap the 7 chord for this inverted chord in the previous chord progression. You may have noticed that every progression has so far been using 1 chord per bar. This is not typical for a whole song, as it becomes quite predictable. Chords can be played for as long or as short as you like. You can mix them up to create rhythmic, riff-like sequences. In a band setting, you also have to consider what other instruments are playing and how your chord progression will complement them. Maybe there's a rhythm that runs through your song and your chord progressions match this. I'll now put some of what we've discussed into a full song example. There are a few things to note before we begin. The song is in the key of G Mixolydian, has a tempo of 142 BPM and a rough AABA structure at its core. It has an intro that sets the scene for the song. It starts on the dominant 7th 1 chord to have that initial bluesy edge. It also utilises flat 6 and flat 3 chords to add some major tension. The rate of chord change is set up here and features throughout the song. It creates a syncopated feel by changing half a beat before the end of bar 1. Then the offbeat chord changes continue, which really moves the song along in an interesting way. The A section or verse utilises some of this syncopated feel in the chord changes. The verse part uses minor 7th, sus4 and first inversion chords to provide a smooth, relaxed feel. This is all repeated twice before the song goes into the B section or chorus. This is a much more straightforward Mixolydian section with one chord per bar for the most part. The chords are all major or dominant 7th to separate it further from the other parts of the song. Then another A section is heard before the intro returns as an outro. The first 8 bars are the same as the start of the song, but the final 4 bars are added on for the finish. A rising bass line is created through the use of borrowed chords and inversions. I used the borrowed major 5 chord at the end of the song to provide a jarring feeling of the G major key before ending on the 1 chord. Now I'll show you how to write a melody for your song. The most important note in Mixolydian is the flat or minor 7th. This is the only note that separates the scale from major / Ionian. It provides the smooth, open sound that Mixolydian is known for. Because the flat 7 note is further away from the tonic or 1 note than in major, Mixolydian has a more relaxed sound that doesn't feel like it wants to resolve as strongly as the major / Ionian scale. Here's a 2-bar G Mixolydian melody with the flat 7th note F in it. I'll play it once so you can hear the relaxed flat 7. Then in bars 3 and 4, I'll repeat the melody, but I'll use the 7th note from the G major, F sharp. Listen to how it has a much stronger pull to the tonic / root note. You want to focus on this flat 7th note to bring out the Mixolydian flavour, but what else can you do to achieve this? If you play notes on a strong beat, then they are felt more and stand out. In a 4/4 time signature with 4 beats in a bar, this would be beats 1 and 3, with the first beat being the strongest. Listen to the following example. In bars 1 and 2, the flat 7th note, F, is played on weak beats. In the second half, it falls on strong beats 1 and 3. I want to give you a few basic melody tips now. These aren't exclusive to the Mixolydian mode, but can help you to think about melodies generally. The main tip would be to keep it simple. In most styles of music, vocal melodies are repetitive, simple, and cover a limited range. Don't overcomplicate your melodies and you won't go far wrong. For example, look at this basic melody in G Mixolydian. When creating melodies, it is important to consider the shape of the pattern. Melodies can move downwards or upwards, in small steps or big leaps. Balancing the movement or shape of the melody is another important part of creating and maintaining interest. Look out for the leaps and steps in this Mixolydian example. I said that placing a note on strong beats can make it stand out. Another thing that can highlight a particular note is making it the highest note in a phrase. This could be used to highlight a key note in your Mixolydian melody, or if you have lyrics, it could be to showcase an important word. It's also important to experiment with and vary the rhythm of your melodic phrases. You can take inspiration from other songs you like, copying the note lengths and fitting in your choice of notes. In this next example, I'll end each phrase with the flat 7th note, F, that was highlighted as being key to the Mixolydian sound. I'll also use a variety of note lengths to create sections that feel high-paced and others that feel more relaxed. Consider mixing up note lengths in your own melody in a similar way. Melodies don't live in isolation, they have a strong relationship with harmony, or in other words, chord progressions. Let's now look at how this relationship works. A melody can be written from two broad approaches. You can write the melody first, and then fit chords to the melody, or you can write the chords first, and then the melody. The second approach is the most common, probably because it's easy to strum chords on a guitar or play them on a piano, and then sing along. If you look at a lot of popular songs, you'll see how the chords directly influence the melody with the choice of notes. If you have an existing Mixolydian key chord progression, you can start with this and create a melody for it. You can of course use the tips and ideas already discussed, but now there are a few more things to consider. The easiest way to build a melody from chords is just to use chord notes. Each chord will be constructed with several notes, and whilst that chord is playing, you can use these notes to create a melody. For example, a basic Mixolydian chord progression is 1, 7, 4, 1. In the key of G Mixolydian, these chords would be G major, F major, and C major. G major has the notes G, B, and D, F major, F, A, and C, and C major, C, E, and G. In the next example, I'll construct a melody using only these chord tones. Listen for how the C note sounds when it's held over the chord change from F major to C major, as they both contain the note. This effect is also heard with the change from C major to G major using the G note. Now I'll use the same chord progression and melodic rhythm, but instead of chord notes, I'll use the other notes from the G Mixolydian mode. The chord note melody feels really safe, and if you place these notes on the strong beats in a bar, it feels even safer. Notes from outside of the chord sound tenser and unsettled. The level of tension depends on several factors. If it's in the scale of the key, then it will have some tension, with different levels within this. And then if you want greater tension, you can reach out for chromatic or alien notes that aren't in the scale. Writing a melody is a balancing act, building up tension and then resolving it by selecting these different notes. Something you may have seen in songs is the use of borrowed chords. This is where chords from a parallel key are used in the current key. A parallel key has the same root or tonic note, so with our examples in the key of G Mixolydian, we could borrow from G major, G minor, G Dorian, etc. This introduces chromatic notes to the song that are outside of the existing key. These tense alien notes can be very noticeable in your melodies. But as discussed earlier, if you use chord notes, then they feel safer. Look at the following example with the chords 1, 4, flat 3, and 7. There is a single chromatic note, B flat. It is the only chromatic note used. It falls on beat 2 of the third bar, so it is not prominent, and it features in the underlying borrowed B flat major chord. Have a listen to how something feels different with this chord and note, and yet it doesn't sound out of place. The flat 3 chord can be borrowed from the parallel, natural minor / Aeolian, Dorian and Phrygian modes. If you compare G Aeolian with the key of G Mixolydian, then you can see there are two notes that are different, B flat and E flat. Using this, you could expand on the phrase over the borrowed B flat major chord to incorporate both of these notes. Here's the last chord progression example with both of these notes played over the flat 3 chord. Listen to the difference the E flat note brings, and how it is tenser because it isn't in the underlying B flat major chord. Utilising different chord types can accommodate melody notes and make them feel safer. Follow along, listen to the melody, and then have a go at writing your own Mixolydian melody. Now it's time to talk about riffs. A riff is a short, repeated, memorable musical phrase. Although strongly associated with rock music and the electric guitar, a riff can feature in any genre and be played on any instrument. The majority of riffs are between 1 and 4 bars in length. Any longer can sound like a melody or solo. All riffs are repeated. This is an essential part of the riff and how they hook themselves into the listener's mind. You could also call them a motif. That is, a musical idea that repeats. A riff can define a song. The first thing you hear in many songs is a riff, and they are the core part of many massive hits. Riffs are like a whole song, bundled up into a short, repeatable package. As such, they are comprised of 3 main parts: rhythm, harmony, and melody. I'll use the G Mixolydian mode now to demonstrate some different riff ideas. I'll present guitar tabs for the riffs. Remember that these ideas can apply to any instrument or MIDI. G Mixolydian is a guitar-friendly key. In standard tuning, you can play any of the open strings without being out of key. As such, it can open up all sorts of easy-to-play riff ideas. Almost anything can be a riff, but for ease I'm going to break them into a few categories here to help you think about different riff approaches. The sound or genre that you are aiming for may dictate the riff styles that you prefer. As always, trust your ear and go with it. Let's start with some interval-based riffs. An interval is simply the distance between 2 notes. Intervals are the building blocks of chords and scales. As such, they are a great point to construct a riff from. The bulk of guitar riffs are played on the lower 3 strings. The E, A and D strings have power and authority associated with bass notes, as the bass generally defines the harmony above it. Denser strings also produce more volume. Because of this, I'll focus on these lower registers in the examples. If you're working with a scale, such as G Mixolydian here, you can experiment by playing 2 notes in the scale that create an interval you like the sound of. Once you find the interval you like, then you can work on the rhythmic idea for your riff. For example, here is a simple riff using 2 notes in the G Mixolydian scale, F and G. This interval is a distance of 1 whole step or 2 semitones. This is known as a major second. I'll play the interval and then develop the rhythm of the riff. So much of the riff writing process is experimentation. Intervals can be played horizontally like you just saw. This is what you would find in a melody, or you can stack them vertically. That is when both notes are played at the same time. This is how chords are created. In the next example, I'll play notes from the G Mixolydian mode at the same time. Listen to how this changes the sound. Each interval will have an open E note in it. Repeating a note like this in a riff is known as a pedal note. I'll discuss this in more detail later. Look out again for the development of the rhythm in this example. You will have heard in the last example how important the rhythmic element was. The rhythm of a riff is what really makes it unique. A lot of riffs utilise syncopation to generate this rhythmic interest. This is where the weak beats in a bar are accented rather than the usual strong beats. For example, in 4/4 time signatures, there are 4 beats in a bar. Usually the strong beats are 1 and 3, and the weak beats 2 and 4. But if we turn this on its head, then you create a syncopated rhythm. And if you utilise notes that don't fall on any of these beats, then it will feel even more syncopated. You can put a rest and avoid notes where the strong beats fall to further create a syncopated feel. We've looked at some of the notes in G Mixolydian, but what creates the Mixolydian sound? At the beginning of the video, I showed you how the only point of difference between the major scale and the Mixolydian mode is the flat 7 note. So this note is critical to the relaxed Mixolydian sound. You also want to highlight that Mixolydian is a major sounding scale. This is heard through the use of the 3rd note, and also the root note of the scale, so you know where the tonic or home is. Here's an example that highlights these notes: G, B and F. It starts with these 3 key notes with a hammer on from F to G as the high point. Then it descends and mixes in a few more notes from the scale. The root note G is the lowest in the riff to highlight its role as the tonic. Let's now talk about pedal note riffs. A pedal note is one that remains the same, usually low down in the arrangement, whilst other notes or chords change above it. This will usually use open E, A and D strings on the guitar. If the note doesn't sustain throughout the riff, it may also be referred to as a pedal point. It will often be the root note of the relevant scale that is repeated to really anchor the listener in the key of the song. But it doesn't have to be, so feel free to experiment. If you've heard heavy metal riffs with palm muted E strings throughout, they are an example of this. This might be one reason to try a drop tuning, like drop D, to get a suitable open note to pedal throughout your riff. You saw an example earlier that had a pedal note. Here's one in G Mixolydian that again uses the E open string, but also the F and G notes we want to target. Now it's time for a classic riff component, the power chord. A favourite of rock and metal, the power chord is a simple, powerful element in many iconic riffs. A power chord is actually just a perfect fifth interval, so it relates back to the first two examples in this video. Power chords are often used with pedal notes that we discussed previously. This is particularly prevalent in metal riffs. On guitar they are usually played as two-note chords, with the first and fifth, or as a three-note chord with the octave added above the fifth. If using a distorted guitar sound, you might also find other techniques used with power chords, such as palm muting and slides. A simple starting point for generating power chord riffs is to use the notes in the relevant scale for your song, and then using each note as a root note for a power chord. As with the other riffs, the rhythmic element is almost more important than the actual chords being played. Here's an example in G Mixolydian using power chords and other single note lines. The power chord riff leads us nicely into the full-blown chord riff. As the name suggests, this is simply combining full chords into a riff. This is where the lines between chord progression and riff can become blurred. But as discussed earlier, the riff will be shorter and more rhythmically driven than a chord progression. Chord-based riffs are easy to have a go at. Just pick one or more chords from a key and start experimenting with the rhythm. For example, here are the diatonic chords in the key of G Mixolydian. A simple and popular chord progression uses the 1 chord G major, the 7 chord F major, and the 4 chord C major. Let's take these chords as the basis of our riff. You can use simple chords like this, but you're not limited. Different chord types can open up interesting sounds, and on the guitar there can be a simple addition or taking away of a finger. This can add rhythmic elements that help elevate us beyond the chord progression. In the next example, I explore this idea by using G dominant 7th and C add 11. The rhythmic variations are short enough to feel like a riff and not a progression. So far I've been using notes that are only in the Mixolydian mode, but riffs don't need to be boxed in like this. You can reach for any notes that you like the sound of. This introduces the idea of modal mixture or modal interchange. This is where you use notes from parallel scales within your riffs. Parallel scales have the same root note as the scale you are using. For example, we are using G Mixolydian here, so parallel scales would include G major, G Lydian, G harmonic minor, amongst others. A lot of riffs aren't considered in this level of detail and created more spontaneously. I'd recommend going for the spontaneous approach to begin with and just reach for notes and sounds that you like. The short nature of a riff won't usually undermine the tonal center of your song. A riff can come into the songwriting process at different times. It could be that you create a great riff in isolation and this inspires you to write the rest of a song. Remember that they contain rhythm, melody and harmony. This song DNA can be unpicked from the riff and lead to quick songwriting. Concentrate on the notes that are emphasized or stand out. These will lead you to suggested chord changes. You could also take an existing chord progression and turn this into a riff. This might be by using chord notes or whole chords as we saw earlier. Or you could take a song melody and use it for your riff inspiration. This is particularly useful for finding rhythmic hooks for your riffs. Sometimes starting with some limitations can really help your riff writing process as it narrows down infinite possibilities to focus your attention. It starts with an 8-bar intro, which I want to create a riff for. I've used mainly chord notes in the riff, with a few extra scale notes. The first 2 bars of the riff set up rhythmic patterns that repeat throughout. The first chord, G dominant 7th, is a G major chord with an F note added, so I begin the note with F and G notes. You can see that the chord changes just before the end of bar 1, and I reflect the chord changes by always changing notes in the riff as the chords change. The second bar uses arpeggios of the E minor and E flat major chords, and repeating the same rhythm but dropping 2 notes by half a step provides a nice flavour of the chords that play. Then the whole riff repeats, but the 4th bar changes the notes to reflect the C major and B flat major chords. The first 4 bars then repeat entirely, but the final few notes change to reflect the F major chord that the intro ends on. Have a listen to how the riff sounds, building up repetition, as well as the rest of the song. I hope this will inspire you to have a go at writing your own Mixolydian riffs. You've learned how to write a Mixolydian mode song, but there's a world of songwriting out there. Watch the playlist on screen now to continue your songwriting journey.